Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about some gold and silver companies that I believe could have some amazing upside potential in the future. And then now after the correction they seem even more attractive than earlier this year. So let's go right into it by talking about gold. And we're starting with the first one, which is Orezone Gold. During a couple of weeks they've had a little bit of a correction from $1.60 per share to now in the $1.30 area. And the fact that they are now in 2025 producing in the mid 100,000 ounces, or like in the mid between like 130 and 150,000 ounces between now and in 2027, they would apparently, if everything goes according to plan, produce almost 250,000 ounces, which is phenomenal. And apparently, according to their website, with comparing different companies of similar size and like production, their market capitalization, they are amongst the cheapest. But obviously that's probably at least one of the reasons is because they are in a high risk area compared to some of these companies that are in Canada and so forth. But there are some of them in Africa, like Pan Africa and Galliano, a little bit cheaper than Galliano, which is in Ghana. But Orezone Gold has 4.5 million ounces of gold in measured and indicated, and 2.4 million ounces of gold in probable and proven reserve. But apparently in like a Q3 they had an increase in all-in sustaining costs, but mostly due to apparently the contract with the government. Apparently when gold surpassed $3,000, if I remember correctly, they had to pay an increased royalty fee due to, you know, the higher gold price. That's the reason. Due to higher increase in like royalty costs, but also due to the local currency increasing compared to dollars, and the fact that they had problems with power outages at the national grid, which meant that they had to use more of their own power generation, which was like diesel power, and had to buy more diesel or increased electricity costs. That's at least like one of the reasons. Gold is at $4,000 per ounce, and the fact that this even with this one-time increase in like royalty, all-in sustaining costs, a couple of $100, probably still very profitable. And the next one, which will be Alkane Resources. The reason why it has piqued my interest is that it is producing. They have a producing asset in Australia, but also in Sweden. But they have an interesting project, Boda Kaiser, which is not producing. It's several years from producing, but it has a tremendous resource. Where apparently that project, or the area in which with Boda and Kaiser, they would have, according to their website, last check, they would have 14.7 million gold equivalent ounces, which is very interesting. Bear in mind, it's not producing that current project, Boda Kaiser, which is in Australia. But they have projects that are producing, like Björkdal in Sweden, and where they have between July 2025 and June 2026 seeing 160 to 170,000 gold ounces in equivalent, where they will be producing gold and antimony, where apparently they will be producing 900 tons of antimony at their Costerfield project. So the first project is called Coeur, which will be producing 80,000 ounces of gold, and Björkdal, which is in Sweden, will produce 44,000 ounces of gold, and the Costerfield will produce 45,000 ounces of gold and 800 to 900 tons of antimony, which is a critical mineral used in making ammunition and so forth. Because it has such a large resource. In the future they have like with the Boda Kaiser, which could be, if they get operational, that would be a major project. But now let's go over to the Red Lake Gold Mines. Has had a little correction this year, where it now has a RSI of like 35, and bear in mind it went from like $1.10 to now in the 80s. Have had a little correction, and the fact that they have a tremendous high grade deposit where they have a 1.6 million gold ounces in indicated, where it's 7.4 grams per ton, very high grade, and they are currently producing, by the way. Obviously they had a little of a capital raise a couple of months ago, which was not very pleasant, but you know, if they can increase the production of gold when gold is at tremendous high levels, that would be more beneficial in the future. Producing company and with supporters like Bank Visa and phenomenal management. And now let's go over to this is a company that I am considering adding to the portfolio, even though it has rallied tremendously, but it seems to be that they have a tremendous resource, which is, listen to this, in measured and indicated, this is Aris Mining, in measured and indicated, they have 18.2 million gold ounces in measured and indicated. What on earth? This is insane. Bear in mind, it has rallied tremendously though. They are two producing mines. In 2025, they would apparently be producing between 230 and 270,000 ounces of gold, and they are in Guyana, in South America, and one in Colombia. Most of the projects are in Colombia, by the way. Oh, they have combined 4 projects, 2 that's producing and 2 that's developing, but 3 of them are in Colombia and 1 is in Guyana. But it seems to be that they would, in 2026, have a target where their Seguna mine, which is in Colombia, they would apparently be upping the production up to where they would be producing 300,000 ounces of gold in 2026. Everything goes to good land. And their Mamaso project would apparently be producing up to 200,000 ounces, which is phenomenal. That would mean that they would go from producing 207,000 in 2026 could produce up to 500,000 ounces. It's very interesting. And they have another other projects, or they have in Guyana, have a 21-year mine life at $1,200 per ounce. Very interesting. Increase their gold production so much in 1 year if everything goes according. In measured and indicated, their Segona mine has 3.4 million ounces of gold at 16 grams per ton, which is insane. And the other producing asset, Marmato, has 6 million ounces of gold at 3 grams per ton, which is also very nice. I think I remember from Rick, I think if it's above 1 gram per ton, that's generally good. But it seems very, like, Aris Mining seems very interesting, even though with it having rallied tremendously, it still seems very promising. Very, very promising. Obviously, none of this is financial advice. So now let's go over to the final gold company on this list, which will be Western Copper and Gold. This is a company we have mentioned earlier this year when it was a lot cheaper. But this video is about companies that seem interesting, that have had a little correction, and bear in mind with gold having rallied tremendously since last time we made a video about this company, I thought I would mention it again. One of the main shareholders is Rio Tinto at almost 10%, and Mitsubishi Materials at 5%. Management have almost 5%, and then even Fidelity Management has 4%. And the fact that this company has 7.6 billion pounds of copper in measured and indicated, and 14.8 million ounces of gold in measured and indicated, and 6.3 million ounces of gold in inferred. And they even have some silver and molybdenum as well. Bear in mind, this company is not producing, bear that in mind, but even on the presentation it says that copper demand is expected to grow almost 70% from now till 2025, or 2050, I mean. Copper demand is suspected to grow 70% between now and 2050. Bear in mind, it's not producing. First one on the list, Coeur Mining, which is the only one out of these four that is actually producing. The company has 200 million ounces of silver in total, and where the major project is it's called Rochester, where they have 172 million ounces of silver out of those 200 million. And the company also has 1.8 million ounces of gold. Bear that in mind, it is producing and it has assets throughout like the Americas, but the majority apparently seems to be in United States, which is very nice. And the reason why I'm adding silver is because a couple of weeks ago, since China's a major silver producer, they would apparently consider putting restrictions on silver. China consists of between 10 and 13% of silver supply. I'll correct this if that's incorrect. So and the fact that silver is increasing, silver's increasing utility in industrial use, then that would be an issue. So then silver companies in the future might really prosper if China, this restriction would apparently be in 2026 to 2027. That would mean that silver companies could perhaps rally a little bit in 2026, 2027. So now let's go over to the two next ones, which will be Cerro de Pasco. We can just talk about this one a little bit. Just hold on. Cerro de Pasco. Apparently they will be processing rather than mining, because it's apparently from a legendary mine down in South America, where when they were mining, apparently it's in Peru. This project is in central Peru, and they would apparently, instead of mining it, they would be processing it, because it's or reprocessing like already mined ore. That's very silver rich apparently, where they would obviously, it would be a lot cheaper to get this started than to actually start a mine. And they have apparently 423 million ounces of silver equivalent, which means that it's not just silver, but it's like equivalent. And they also have a lot of gallium at up to 80 grams per ton. And gallium is very useful for like semiconductors and so forth. And apparently they would, I don't know when they would be producing, but in a couple of years. And bear in mind, with gallium and indium, the estimated annual profits, according to the website, would be $610 million. Yikes, like that's a lot of it. And they would apparently have, with silver, the grade is 1.66 ounces per ton, zinc is 1.4% per ton, and lead 0.89, and copper is 0.09. So it's mostly silver and gallium. And so now let's go over to the next one. Bear in mind, I really like Cerro de Pasco, but it is not producing. Bear that in mind. Only Coeur Mining is producing out of this list, but the two ones I like the most is Silver 47, due to the fact that they have projects in Alaska and tremendous resource. Bear in mind it most. Now let's talk about Silver 47. It has 10 million ounces of silver in equivalent at 333 grams per ton. Very nice. But they have 236 million ounces of silver in inferred, which is basically an educated guess. But still, it's a phenomenal project, and the fact that it is just in the United States. They have one in New Mexico, one in Nevada called Hugh, and in Alaska called Red Mountain. The fact that America needs to get its act together and get their own independent sources of resources, this company could really benefit from fast tracking and from support from the government. Imagine if they turn most of this resource into indicated and they actually get like assistance from the government, which as someone who doesn't really like the government that much, but hey, you need an independent society, and sometimes you just have to work with, have different interesting allies. So now let's go over to the final silver company, which will be Aftermath silver, which I learned about a couple of weeks ago. I have heard about it before, but I didn't really consider it before. And I might consider it investing in it now, because listen to this. They have, in measured and indicated, 100 million ounces of silver. They have 589 million pounds of copper and 300 million pounds of zinc. So it's a tremendous project. Their mine is not producing. It's not producing. But it is in Chile. Pardon me, Chile. But they also have another project called Charlo Polo, which apparently has 35 million ounces of silver in indicated and 11 million in inferred. That major project they have is called Berenguela. Now, I hope you thoroughly enjoyed these. Are the silver and gold companies that I think have some upside potential due to the fact that they had a correction and the fact that they have a tremendous resource. You know, seems interesting. Bear in mind, none of this is financial advice as per usual. I just like these companies and I thought I would make a video about them because this knowledge about like these companies or companies that I have, a lot of companies that I've benefited tremendously from is from watching YouTube videos, and then I'm being informed about a company and then I do the research and I find out it's a phenomenal opportunity, and then, you know, so bear that in mind though, that this is for like long-term investors and long-term thinking. Demand. Gold is having an increased role in as a safer asset, and after the Americans liquidated the Russian assets because they didn't like what they were doing in Ukraine, only we can invade other people without consequences. How dare you? How dare you, sir? So I hope you thoroughly enjoyed. Like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed. And till then, have a wonderful weekend. Peace.